Sandra stood in her small kitchen that morning, arranging birthday cards for her father's 65th birthday. She wanted everything perfect, even though her heart felt uneasy. She hadn't seen her mother in months, not since the messy divorce was finalized. Still, she hoped tonight would be peaceful. "This is Dad's night," she whispered while tying a ribbon on a card. Later, as she drove toward the restaurant and spotted both her parents' cars in the parking lot, her heartbeat quickened. She inhaled slowly and said, "Please, let tonight be different." But deep down she felt a storm waiting. Before Sandra stepped out of the car, memories of her childhood returned. Their Connecticut home looked perfect from the outside, almost like a magazine picture. Her father, Dennis, a gentle architect, always came home late with tired eyes, wrinkled shirts, and a soft smile for his children. Her mother, Laura, lived for charity galas and social events, always wearing that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Her younger brother, Ben, was the golden child who could do no wrong. "Ben is a natural star," Laura always said proudly. Sandra, the quiet, art-loving daughter, learned to shrink herself early. Sandra remembered being 12, running home with a state essay award, eager to show her mother. Laura glanced at the certificate for barely 3 seconds. "That's nice, honey," she said, then smiled wider. "But guess what? Ben made varsity today." His trophies filled the living room while Sandra's awards were boxed away in the basement. Laura's criticism was wrapped in sweet poison. "Sandra, are you sure you need another slice? You gain weight so easily. Or, maybe we fix your nose for your 16th birthday." Dennis rarely interfered. "Laura, leave her alone," he'd whisper, never with real force. At 15, Sandra discovered the first crack in their perfect home. She returned early from a sleepover and noticed a familiar car in the driveway. Andrew's car, her father's business partner. Curious, she walked quietly to the kitchen window. What she saw shattered something inside her. Laura and Andrew were kissing like reckless teenagers against the kitchen counter, Laura's wedding ring, designed by Dennis, glinting under the lights. Sandra ran into the yard and threw up, not from sickness but heartbreak. Laura dismissed her coldness later as teenage moods. Dennis never noticed. He was drowning in deadlines. Ben stayed adored and unaware. College became Sandra's escape route. She chose a school 8 hours away despite Laura's protests. "Why so far? Go to my old college," Laura insisted. But Sandra needed space from secrets and criticism. At State University, she finally discovered herself. She cut her hair short, joined a magazine club, made friends who loved her humor, and even tattooed a tiny paintbrush on her wrist. That was where she met Daniel, a tall, funny design student who made her laugh in class. On their first date he said, "You're different in a good way," and for the first time Sandra felt seen. When Sandra brought Daniel home for Thanksgiving, Laura judged him instantly. He didn't come from money, drove an old Honda, and wore simple flannel shirts. "He seems nice enough," Laura said with her tight smile, which meant he wasn't acceptable. "But honey, you could do so much better. What about that Harrison boy from the club?" Sandra felt Daniel squeeze her hand under the table, grounding her. Later that night he whispered, "Your mom doesn't scare me." Sandra laughed softly, though her heart ached. She knew Laura had already decided Daniel didn't fit her perfect family picture. The wedding planning quickly became a battlefield. Sandra wanted a small garden ceremony, but Laura demanded the country club. She wanted a 7-course meal. Sandra wanted barbecue. Laura created a guest list of 200 people Sandra barely knew. Whenever Sandra pushed back, Laura cried dramatically. "This is the only wedding I'll ever get to plan," she sobbed. Dennis stayed silent. "Your mother knows about these things," he always said. Daniel noticed everything. "She's trying to erase you from your own wedding," he told Sandra after another exhausting argument. And he was right. Every decision Laura changed sent that same message. The wedding day itself was beautiful, but not in a way that felt like Sandra. Everything looked perfect, polished, controlled, like one of Laura's charity galas. Sandra smiled in the photos, but the smile didn't belong to her. It was the practiced smile she learned from watching Laura for years. After the ceremony, Daniel whispered, "You okay?" Sandra answered yes, but inside she felt like a visitor in her own life. Dennis paid for everything but never once confronted Laura. "Let her have this," he'd said. And Sandra, exhausted from fighting, allowed the day to pass quietly, almost forgettably. 2 years before Dennis's 65th birthday, everything shattered. Sandra was drinking coffee in his office when he nervously set down his mug. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice trembling. Before he spoke, she already knew. "Your mother and I are getting divorced," he said softly. Instead of shock, relief washed over Sandra. Dennis noticed and gave a sad smile. "You knew about Andrew, didn't you?" The question stole her breath. She nodded slowly. Dennis revealed everything. There were others, Sandra, at least 4 more. Sandra felt the room spin as years of confusion finally made sense. Sandra sat speechless as Dennis explained the truth he had carried for decades. He told her he stayed for the children, believing stability mattered more than happiness. He revealed how Laura had been secretly moving money, opening hidden accounts, buying properties, shifting assets without his knowledge. "She's been planning this for years," he said, handing Sandra bank statements. Even worse, Laura's lawyer was Andrew's brother, and together they were building a case to paint Dennis as a cold, neglectful husband. Sandra stared at the documents, whispering, "How could she do this?" Dennis sighed. "I kept hoping love would be enough." The divorce quickly turned brutal. Laura hired the most aggressive lawyer in the state and demanded everything: the house, alimony, half of Dennis's business. She told anyone who would listen that Dennis was cold and uncaring. Ben believed her instantly. He stormed into Dennis's office one afternoon and shouted, "How could you destroy our family?" Sandra tried to explain Laura's long affair with Andrew, but Ben refused to hear it. "You always hated Mom," he snapped. Watching her brother defend their mother so fiercely broke something inside Sandra. She felt like she was losing more than just her parents' marriage. As the legal battle continued, Sandra watched Dennis shrink under the weight of years of emotional damage. His normally steady hands trembled when he signed documents. He moved into a small apartment and avoided social gatherings. That was when their Thursday dinners began. Every week Sandra cooked and they talked, really talked, for the first time in their lives. Without Laura's sharp voice controlling every moment, Dennis finally relaxed. One night he said, "Your mother wasn't always like this, or maybe she was and I was too young to see it." Sandra listened quietly, realizing how deeply he had been isolated. During the financial discovery phase, more secrets surfaced. The charity Laura proudly ran had been funneling money into her personal accounts for years. Donations meant for sick children were paying for luxurious trips and shopping sprees. Dennis showed Sandra the reports, his voice heavy. "If I pursue charges, she could go to jail," he said. "But I don't want more destruction. I just want peace." Sandra felt stunned. Laura had built her public image on kindness and generosity. Yet behind closed doors she had used suffering children as a shield for fraud. It was a betrayal deeper than Sandra imagined. The divorce ended with Laura taking the house and a large settlement, though much less than she demanded. The judge saw enough financial manipulation to limit her claims. But Laura walked away acting victorious, telling everyone that justice had been served. Ben moved home to support her and stopped speaking to Dennis altogether. Holidays became awkward, split between houses, with Sandra often stuck in the middle. Yet something beautiful emerged in the chaos. Dennis, free from Laura's control, slowly came back to life. He attended Sandra's daughter's recitals, helped Daniel build a treehouse, and laughed more than he had in years. Dennis eventually started dating again. The woman's name was Carol, a gentle bookstore owner with warm eyes and a soft laugh. She was nothing like Laura. No cold smiles, no sharp criticism, no endless need for perfection. Sandra noticed how Dennis's shoulders loosened whenever Carol was around. One afternoon he told Sandra, "I didn't realize how lonely I was until now." Watching her father rediscover joy felt like watching a wilted plant finally touched by sunlight. Sandra's heart softened, knowing he deserved every bit of this happiness after decades of emotional suffocation. For the first time in years, hope returned. On the morning of Dennis's 65th birthday, Sandra woke with a clear mission. She wanted to give her father a celebration worthy of his quiet strength. Dennis tried to convince her to keep it simple, but she shook her head and laughed. "Dad, you've spent your whole life putting everyone else first. Tonight is for you." She chose a restaurant Dennis once redesigned, a beautiful space filled with warm lights and tall windows. As she packed photo displays into the car, Daniel kissed her forehead. "He's going to love this, Sandy." She smiled, hoping the day would stay peaceful. Sandra's daughters, Emma and Sophie, made handmade cards for their grandfather. Emma drew Dennis as a superhero architect building cities with his hands, while Sophie wrote a short poem about Grandpa's hugs feeling strong and safe. Sandra felt emotional seeing their love for him. But her peace shattered when Ben texted that morning. "Mom insists on coming. She says she has every right." Sandra stared at the message, her stomach sinking. Daniel read over her shoulder and said calmly, "Whatever happens, you're ready." Sandra wasn't sure she agreed. Laura attending meant trouble, and deep down she knew it. Sandra replied carefully, "This is Dad's day. If Mom comes, she must respect that." Ben responded quickly, "Mom was part of this family longer than anyone. She's coming." Sandra felt her jaw tighten but forced herself to breathe. She had spent weeks preparing for this event, tracking down relatives Laura drove away, inviting colleagues who respected Dennis, arranging photos of buildings he designed. When Dennis arrived early and saw the displays, his eyes filled with tears. "Sandra, this is too much." She hugged him tightly. "It's exactly right, Dad. Tonight we honor the real you, not the version Mom created." Guests began arriving, filling the room with warm greetings and real affection. Dennis's former mentor told stories about his early years as a passionate young architect. His brother Tom arrived as a surprise, and Dennis broke down crying as they embraced. For a moment, Sandra felt everything had been worth it. Then, at 6:45, the atmosphere shifted. Laura walked in as if stepping onto a red carpet, wearing a sparkling dress and a confident smile. Ben followed closely, looking stressed. Laura scanned the room like she owned it, greeting important guests first and pretending Sandra didn't exist. Sandra watched her mother glide from table to table, acting like the gracious former wife instead of the woman who had tried to destroy Dennis during the divorce. Her daughters rushed to hug Ben, but Laura's eyes were cold when she looked at them. "Hello, children," she said in that sharp tone that turned greetings into criticism. Daniel moved closer to Sandra, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone," he whispered. As everyone found their seats, Dennis looked uncomfortable but stayed calm. Sandra could feel Laura's eyes scanning the room, searching for control. And Sandra knew, tonight's peace would not last. Dinner began smoothly, the restaurant serving Dennis's favorite meal, simple steak with seasonal vegetables. The wine came from a vineyard Sandra and Dennis once visited together, one of their rare father-daughter trips without Laura. As plates were cleared, Dennis stood to give a speech. His hands trembled, but his voice grew steady. "Birthdays remind us to appreciate the people who make life meaningful," he said. He thanked his colleagues, his brother, his mentor. Then he looked at Sandra and added, "And my daughter Sandra, who has shown me what real family means." Laura's jaw tightened, but the room applauded warmly. Dennis then surprised Sandra. "Sandra, would you say a few words?" She hadn't prepared anything, but she rose slowly, feeling every eye in the room on her. She spoke from the heart. "My father taught me that integrity isn't loud. It's shown in quiet choices, in doing what's right even when it's hard." She talked about his work on shelters, his kindness toward young architects, his honesty. The applause filled the room, warm and sincere. Sandra felt tears forming, until one cold, sharp voice cut through the celebration. Laura stood abruptly and said, "How interesting, hearing such a speech from someone who isn't real family." Silence fell instantly. Sandra felt the air shift as Laura stepped forward, smoothing her dress dramatically. "I suppose now is the right time," she declared, "to reveal certain family secrets." Dennis said sharply, "Laura, stop," but she ignored him. "Sandra is not Dennis's biological daughter," she announced. Gasps rippled across the room. Ben's face went pale. Laura continued with false sympathy. "She is the result of a brief mistake early in our marriage." Dennis raised her kindly, "But she has never truly been part of this family." Sandra felt the whole room staring at her, waiting for her to collapse. But instead of breaking, Sandra stood tall. "You're right, Mom," she said calmly. "I did learn the truth, 6 months ago." Laura smiled smugly, thinking she had won. Then Sandra pulled out her phone. "But your details are wrong." She opened a document. "I am Dennis's biological daughter. The DNA test shows 99.9% certainty." Laura's smile vanished. Sandra continued, her voice steady. "But Ben isn't Dennis's son." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Ben stood abruptly. "What are you talking about?" Sandra didn't look away. "Andrew is your biological father, Ben. Mom and Andrew have been together for 25 years. Ben's knees seemed to weaken as he stared at Sandra, then at Laura. "Mom, is this true?" he whispered. Laura stepped toward him, but he pulled back. "Ben, sweetheart, I did what I had to do," she began. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "You lied to me my entire life." Dennis stepped forward gently. "Ben, you are my son in every way that matters." But Ben's eyes filled with betrayal. "You knew?" he asked. Dennis nodded sadly. "For 15 years. I chose to love you anyway." Ben covered his face, trembling, as the room watched his world collapse. Sandra continued speaking, her voice steady but gentle. "When Mom and Andrew started their affair, it wasn't a one-time mistake. It began 25 years ago. I hired a private investigator after the divorce because I wanted to understand everything. And the truth is all here. Hotel records, credit card receipts, emails." Laura's face shifted from pale to ghostly. Guests stared in disbelief as Sandra added, "Andrew paid for Ben's college. He attended every one of Ben's games for a reason." The room murmured with shock. Sandra looked at Ben and whispered, "You deserved the truth, even if it hurts." Ben stared at his mother with heartbreak in his eyes. "Did Andrew know I was his son?" he asked weakly. Laura hesitated, then nodded. "We agreed it was better this way," she said. "Dennis could give you a better life." Ben shook his head slowly. "Better life. Dennis missed my games because he was working to support us. Meanwhile, you two lied to him every day." Laura reached out again, but Ben stepped back sharply. "Don't," he said. "Not tonight." Dennis placed a hand on Ben's shoulder, whispering, "You are mine, son. That will never change." Tears streamed down Ben's face. One of the guests, Dennis's mentor, stood up angrily. "Laura, you told me Dennis refused my offer to invest in his firm. But he never even knew I offered, did he?" Another guest added, "You told us Dennis was abusive. That's why you needed weekends away." Laura's book club friend shouted, "You said Dennis was cheating with his secretary." The room filled with overlapping voices, each revealing a lie Laura had told over the years. The web of deception unraveled in real time. Sandra watched Laura's polished mask crack as people realized they had been manipulated for decades. The room grew louder until Sandra raised her hand. "There's more," she said quietly. Everyone fell silent again. Mom's charity, the Foundation for Childhood Cancer, it paid out only $50,000 to actual families. The rest went to her personal expenses. Gasps echoed through the room. "Many of you donated," Sandra continued. "You believed you were helping sick children, But you were funding vacations, jewelry, and designer clothes. Dennis's mentor, who lost a grandchild to cancer, spoke through tears. I gave $100,000 in his memory. Laura froze, her eyes wide with panic. Sandra pressed a button, and emails appeared on the restaurant screen. Messages between Laura and Andrew discussing how to hide money, how to make Dennis look neglectful, how to time the divorce. One email read, "Just 10 more years. Then I can leave with a proper settlement." Another read, "Make sure your wife believes the beach trips are golf weekends." The room stared in stunned silence. Dennis finally spoke. "Laura, I wanted peace. But you couldn't stop attacking, even tonight." Laura grabbed her purse and hissed, "This isn't over." Sandra answered calmly, "It is for us." The door closed behind her. The door's soft click echoed through the room like thunder. Everyone remained silent, processing the truth they had just witnessed. Ben stood trembling, unable to look at either parent. Dennis stepped toward him gently. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he whispered. "You're my son, and that will never change." Ben wiped his eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I believed every lie she told." Dennis pulled him into a tight embrace. Guests watched with softened expressions, finally seeing the truth. Dennis had been the loyal parent all along, and Ben had been an innocent pawn. Sandra walked toward Ben next, placing a hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. Ben nodded, his face still streaked with tears. "I was so cruel to you," he whispered. "I blamed you for everything." Sandra shook her head. "Mom trained us to be enemies. But we're grown now. We can choose differently." Ben exhaled shakily, as though letting go of years of confusion. Guests began gathering their things, some offering quiet apologies to Dennis for believing Laura's lies. The room that had once felt tense now felt strangely lighter, like truth had opened the windows. After everyone left, Dennis placed a hand on the table and breathed deeply. Daniel helped him sit down while Sandra gathered the remaining decorations. "I'm so sorry this happened on your birthday," she said. Dennis shook his head slowly. "No, Sandra. This was the best gift I could have received. Freedom." She smiled sadly, understanding what he meant. Laura's lies had clung to him for decades. Tonight they shattered. Daniel squeezed Sandra's shoulder. "You handled this with so much strength," he whispered. She didn't feel strong, just relieved. For the first time in years, her family could begin to heal honestly. 3 months later, Sandra sat in her therapist's office, processing everything that had happened. "How do you feel about the way you handled that night?" Dr. Miller asked. Sandra thought for a moment. "Proud," she said. "I stayed calm. I didn't fight with her. I just told the truth." Therapy helped her understand the patterns she grew up with. The gaslighting, the criticism covered as concern, the divide and control tactics Laura used. Children of narcissists often grow into adults who feel never enough, Dr. Miller explained. Sandra nodded. Those wounds were still healing, but she finally understood they weren't her fault. Ben had also started therapy, struggling to rebuild his identity after learning Andrew was his biological father. But Dennis stayed by his side. They met for lunch every week, working on the business together and talking about life with honesty for the first time. "I can't believe I defended Mom so strongly," Ben told Sandra once. "It's okay," she said gently. "We all survived her lies in different ways." Their sibling relationship began transforming into something warm and real, free from the competition Laura always encouraged. Ben even apologized to several people he had hurt under her influence. Meanwhile, Dennis's life blossomed. His health improved, his laughter returned, and his relationship with Carol deepened. He traveled to places Laura once called too simple, painted in his free time, and rebuilt friendships she had destroyed. Sandra watched with joy. "I wasted so many years trying to make her happy," Dennis told her one day, painting beside her. She shook her head gently. "You raised us with integrity, Dad. Nothing about that was wasted." He smiled softly, and Sandra felt peace knowing he finally believed it. The man who once lived in quiet shadows was now glowing in the sun. Sandra's own home became a place of healing. Her daughters thrived without Laura's constant criticism. Emma grew more confident, proudly showing her drawings, while Sophie experimented with art and poetry. Daniel often told Sandra, "Your calm strength that night taught them more than any lecture ever could." Sandra believed him. She saw it in the way her daughters spoke up respectfully, set boundaries confidently, and understood that honesty was more valuable than pretending everything was perfect. They were growing up free from the emotional chains Sandra had carried for years. The extended family began reconnecting too. Cousins who had drifted away under Laura's influence returned with apologies and warm embraces. Dennis's parents, now in their 80s, visited often. They cried when they held Emma and Sophie, saying, "We missed so much because of her." Sandra didn't blame them. Narcissists isolate, divide, and control. That was Laura's pattern for decades. But now the family knitted itself back together, thread by thread, each visit adding something bright to the future. Even Patricia, Andrew's ex-wife, reached out to Sandra. She thanked her for exposing the truth that freed her from years of gaslighting. One quiet afternoon, Sandra found a letter from Laura in her mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, cold, controlled. She didn't open it. Instead, she placed it back in an envelope and returned it with a simple note. "The truth has been told. There is nothing left to say." Her therapist called it healthy boundaries, and for Sandra, it felt like reclaiming power she never knew she had. The family no longer lived under Laura's shadow. They were building a life shaped by honesty, kindness, and mutual respect, the kind of life Sandra once thought impossible. Months later, Sandra watched Dennis and Carol in the garden with Emma and Sophie, teaching them how to care for flowers. Ben and his new girlfriend, a kind teacher named Jessica, arrived for dinner carrying homemade bread. Daniel's laughter drifted from the kitchen. Everything felt peaceful, simple, real, warm. Sandra smiled as she realized the truth. They were no longer performing family. They were being family. She whispered to herself, "I am Dennis's daughter in every way that matters." After years of lies and manipulation, she finally understood her strength. Truth had given her freedom, and a family rebuilt on love.